You can now get a 30-day trial to experience The Athletic for free. Visit the link in the description below to try it now.
Hello and welcome to Tifo IRL. I'm Alex, I'm an analyst for Tifo. Today we're going to be discussing England. This is our new channel, it's very exciting. If you like it, please do subscribe, like the videos, leave comments. We're going to be doing a host of content during the Euros. Quick, up-to-date tactical stuff, deep dives on teams. So hopefully, if that's your thing, you will get on board with the channel. I'd just like to say as well, we are next to a building site. This has been a recurrent issue during these few videos. Hopefully, they'll finish soon, but please bear with us while the noise is happening. And ideally, it won't be too much of a distraction like that door. So yes, we're going to look at England today. We're going to discuss how they attack, how they defend, some of the issues that they have that opposition teams might try to exploit. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion as well about the 4-3-3 versus a 3 at the back system. Southgate has used both, particularly the 3 in tournament football. And I'm just going to have a quick look and say why he might do so again, even if he doesn't. So without further ado, England. Before we get started on the tactics, just going to have a quick look at the squad. Obviously, England in the 2018 World Cup reached the semi-final where they were beaten by Croatia, who are in their group again. That's an exciting clash. Quite a few of these guys are still present. I think what's interesting is that if you look at the squad, and obviously Southgate has named an initial 33-man squad, that's going to be pruned to 26, and that will happen tonight. So some of what we're doing here is a little bit guesswork based, but obviously the timing of things is not ideal. I think you can probably assume though that there are maybe 5 players that have an absolutely guaranteed starting position in Gareth Southgate's strongest 11. These would be Harry Maguire if fit, John Stones, Declan Rice, Mason Mount and Harry Kane. I think these people almost certainly will start the big games. Around everything else, there are question marks. And I think actually in most of these positions, there are question marks because of the quality and depth in those positions rather than because there are weaknesses. So what we've gone with here is a probable strongest lineup. However, particularly in these wide areas, so we've picked Sterling and Sancho, there's a very strong case for bringing in people here like Phil Foden, for example, possibly bringing in Marcus Rashford here instead. In the fullback positions, again, Reece James, Kyle Walker, even Kieran Trippier, who's had a superb season with Atletico Madrid, who obviously won La Liga. Plenty of options there, and Ben Chilwell and Luke Shaw will duke it out for the left back spot. I know this is getting very crowded, please bear with me. In central midfield, a little bit of a weakness, possibly, but Jude Bellingham, who's only 17, but has really, really impressed both with Borussia Dortmund and in his England cameos. Probably the closest thing England have to a natural 8 as well. He's there. Jordan Henderson has barely played any football second half of the season, but again, is in that squad, and if he's fit, provides a lot of options. Calvin Phillips, great season for Leeds. So he's there too. Centre-back is probably the area where England have, not necessarily weaknesses, but definitely a reliance on these two, John Stones and Harry Maguire, especially Maguire for reasons that we'll look at a little bit later. Options, probably Tyrone Mings on the left side, Ben White as a stand-in on the right side. Obviously, Kyle Walker can play as a centre-back. Generally speaking, though, he's only done so in a 3. So it's one of those things where potentially if there are injuries to Maguire or Stones, it's one of the reasons that Southgate might adapt to a back 3 in order to kind of mitigate that weakness of individuals missing and just have an increase in the numbers. Finally, in goal, again, Dean Henderson, Jordan Pickford. Southgate has shown a preference for Pickford. That's largely based on his distribution, but Henderson has certainly worked on that. and has impressed quite a lot with Manchester United. So it's really, really hard to pick. We're going to be basing this off what is a probable strongest starting lineup. So if, you know, of all the things to get annoyed about with this video, that's probably not the one, because it is guesswork at this point. So obviously, with things being as they are, with the squad yet to be pruned, with players still potentially coming back from injury, with a number of these key players also missing from the friendly games against Austria and Romania, it is really quite difficult to guess on what the lineup is going to be. So when we're explaining attack and build-up and defence and so on, please bear in mind that this is system-based stuff, not necessarily player-based stuff. Obviously, individual players bring individual things to that, and we will try and reflect that a little bit. So let's look at how England build up and attack. So England's build up and attack. We'll be looking at this initially in the 4-3-3. We'll do the 3 at the back as a little section at the end. England are a patient, possession-based team in their defensive third, and they have a fairly straightforward couple of things that they do in early build-up. If we contract the opposition back to give us a little bit more space, so what we'll get here is the wide players are pushing up like this, and we'll concentrate on the back four and Declan Rice to start with. So the fullbacks will push up and they'll maintain some of the width. Centre-backs will split fairly wide, and Declan Rice will patrol this sort of area here, acting as a single pivot. The reason that we call it a pivot is because the rest of the play can pivot around that. So he's the person who, say, Maguire, for example, will make a pass to here, and then Rice can play it back to Stones, and that can then switch the play over. He also will sometimes drop right in, and this will allow the other centre-backs to advance up the pitch a little bit. That allows England to kind of slowly progress the ball patiently. You get passing angles here, which mean that ball retention is quite straightforward, because they can pass the ball around amongst themselves. But this is all done in a fairly kind of slow and measured manner, much like how I speak. Sometimes, particularly against sides that play with 3 attackers. So let's say, for example, we've got a striker and these wide players are here like this, and England are like this. Rice will sort of drop back into this left-hand sided spot as well. This is to try to isolate the opposition wide attackers, draw them forwards, and that creates more space for the fullbacks. And again, this is one of the reasons why Southgate has quite often preferred Jordan Pickford, because Pickford's left-footed, so you can get these passes out here like, there we go, that's the curve. You can get these sort of looped passes that go round the outside and reach this player here, or possibly even this player here, pushing up into this space. So as England progress the ball forwards, let's have these guys dropping off a little bit, give them some space. The aim really is to allow the centre-backs to carry the ball forwards, with the full-backs being used to make sure that possession is retained, and to try and start moving the ball up the pitch. Because ultimately what they want to do is they want to be able to start their more progressive, attacking, incisive moves from a position slightly higher up. Now, England will on occasion transition more directly, but there are issues with this. So for example, against Belgium in the Nations League, because Belgium were pressing very aggressively, on the few occasions that England tried these kind of lower percentage, more direct passes, let's have him a bit further back and a pass like this. Because there's more time and space here, then it allows this player to nip in front. And if England are pushed up here, like they sometimes are, then it can become quite easy to create numerical overloads once the ball is won back, and then you've got players attacking here like this. And that causes problems for England's back to even with Declan Rice in there. So that's one of the reasons why England favour this kind of slow, patient build-up from the back initially. So as they're doing that, what's crucial here is that these wide forwards will tend to do one of two different things. And this will depend on which side England ultimately are trying to look to attack on. England are very, very left side dominant. And there's a reason for this. It's partly because Mason Mount is the player that sort of oscillates here between the lines. He will play in this kind of hybrid role. Sometimes we call it like a free 8 or a 8-10. So while he's nominally here on the left side of a midfield 2 with a pivot behind, he's actually pushing up into much more aggressive positions. Kane similarly is dropping off. So you get this nice sort of mixture of players staggered at different intervals. Sterling as well will drop off very deep here. And this allows whoever plays on this right-hand side, whether it's Sancho or Foden, who likes to cut inside, or it's Rashford, who's got these long, the ability to maintain sprints for long distances, creates a lot of space for them. So England will probably overload this. And this is another reason why we want to highlight Harry Maguire. Because one of the things that Maguire does really, really expertly is carry the ball forwards. And these incisive runs that he does, where he kind of builds up a head of steam and just starts trundling forwards, very, very difficult to dispossess because the man is built like a tank, means that England straight away have not only got the ball forwards, but they're almost guaranteed by adding a fourth player, sometimes even a fifth player, to this side of the pitch, to create the sort of numerical overloads that then allow them to play the kind of attacking football in this area that they want to. Also, as a direct result of this, the opposition will start to get attracted over. And we've talked about this a lot before with other teams. This then leaves these guys in acres of space, and that can allow for these late sort of runs into the box. Walker can tuck inside here. Phillips can push up, knowing that Walker is now over here to protect him. Rice, Stones will sort of hang back. This is a very kind of common structure that we see England in once the ball is in this sort of part of the pitch. And that's because they favour this kind of left side. So if the ball is in this left side, what are England trying to do with it? Well, in these players here, and we've got Shaw as our left back, but remember this could just as easily be Ben Chilwell because he's really, really good at this too. You have a fullback who is able to overlap and then pull crosses in, or underlap, bulk out central midfield, play, clever through passes. Mason Mount is the kind of player who again can burst in behind or can drop off, come a little more central, can even get round himself. Sterling, the same. The point of this is that England create let's make it more clear. England are creating a triangle between these players, but all of these players can do each other's jobs when the ball gets into this position. So you'll see a number of things happening. For example, Mount might make the initial burst into this dangerous area, get the ball, and then while Sterling is kind of tucking round inside like this, Shaw pushes up, takes the ball, and then makes a cross in. So that's one of the options. Shaw could just go on a fairly simple overlap like that, but because this defender here is caught in two minds, does he track Shaw, does he stay with Sterling? What that means is that if he tracks Shaw, okay, the cross is unlikely to come in, but Shaw can then just play it back and Sterling's free. If he doesn't and he stays with Sterling, then he's got the option to just either put a cross in directly or carry the ball to the byline for one of those cutbacks. Mount himself can burst through and take that pass and then get into shooting opportunities. And we've seen that Mount is really, really dangerous when he gets the ball in this sort of area. There was the deflected goal against Belgium, which came from this sort of position. He's scored a number of goals for England from exactly here. So it's very understandable why England overload this left side, because it's full of good players that can all swap around and do different things. And because it leaves this right-hand side freer, England can create a nice structure in possession, which kind of guards what's happening on this side of the pitch. There's room for late runners coming into the box. Because the opposition are drawn over this way, it does create that kind of space, and it's very effective. It's how England score a lot of their goals. There is one other thing to mention in terms of England's build-up, and that's obviously probably the best striker in the Premier League this season, certainly in terms of goals and assists, and that's Harry Kane. And it is remarkable to top both the goals and assists columns in the same season, particularly playing for quite a negative Spurs side. So if we've got this kind of slightly staggered sort of system, which is what England will kind of look like as they move the ball through the lines. Obviously, Kane's great ability is that he is at once such a good striker that opposition defenders are naturally drawn to him and panic about where he is and don't want to leave him alone. But he's also such a good playmaker that if he drops off, opposition midfielders will have exactly the same problems. And what this means as well is that England have effectively, I don't want to say two number 10s, because Kane is not a 10. He will spend a lot of his time up here. And Mount is not a 10 because he spends a lot of his time as an 8. But they have two players that can both occupy this space here and act as a 10, even if that's not their nominal position. And that again makes England quite dangerous, particularly if they manage to get the ball in this sort of area, whether that's Kane dropping off or Mount pushing up, or even Phillips pushing up. You've then got players with real pace in the wide areas who are able to feed on those through passes, who are able to get in behind the defence, attack the channel either on the outside of the opposition fullback or potentially in the space between the opposition fullback and centre-back. And that's very, very dangerous as well. That allows England to be a little bit more direct. So if they transition more vertically, and this will probably happen a little bit more against teams that try to press them high and play quite expansively and leave gaps in this area. It's not going to be that likely to happen against teams who sit really, really deep and try and compress the space, because there won't be much. But if they can get the ball to transition quite quickly here, then England become very, very dangerous. This is one of the reasons why, although we really like Jadon Sancho, if Phil Foden plays in this position with his ability to cut inside and attack in space, because he has a really good appreciation of where to run, acceleration, how to attack players while he's in possession, that means against teams where maybe it's a little bit later in the game and it's a bit looser because the game is being chased, or because the team are trying to play more expansively, that could be a really dangerous option for England to bring Foden on, get the ball into this area with Kane dropping off, and then play these passes in behind. So that's how England attack. It's patient, methodical, build up at the back with Rice dropping off, movement between the lines and central midfield, particularly the creation of these triangles on the left-hand side with interchangeable, technically adept players, space on the right to try and attack in behind, and the role of Harry Kane dropping off and pushing up. Now let's have a quick look at defence. So we've looked at how England attack. Now let's have a quick look at their defence. England like to press. These pressing and possession build up from the back, these are the pillars of Southgate's England, the England DNA that was devised by the FA, key tenets. And so it's no surprise to see not only that England press, but also, given the preponderance of pressing within top flight football generally, that the best players from the best teams are pretty adept at pressing anyway. So let's say that the opposition have the ball here. Maybe they've won it from like a clearance or a misplaced pass or something like that. Kane isn't the best presser in the world. He sort of chugs around a little bit, but he will pressure towards the fullback, and then England will look to kind of get ahead and they'll press pretty aggressively. If the wide players kind of tuck inside here, fullbacks will push up like this. And what England want to try and do, obviously, is not only win the ball back, but second to winning the ball back, they want to create a situation in which really the only thing the opposition can do is hit it long. Because when they hit it long, they turn possession back over to England. England can drop off and they can start that patient possession game again. And it is noticeable with England and a couple of the other sides that we'll be looking at that possession of the ball is a form of defence. If you can hog the ball, deny the opposition the opportunity to have it themselves, clearly you're going to register fewer shots against and so on. And that's really a tactic that England use. So this pressing, Mount is a particularly effective presser, Phillips is a particularly effective presser, as you'd expect from a Leeds player. Rice will sort of anchor this area here. The fullbacks will try and get ahead and they'll defend this space quite aggressively. So if a pass is kind of coming in here, the fullbacks will seek to nip ahead if they can, try and intercept that ball. Sterling, again, as a Manchester City player, is good at pressing. One of the things that's worth noting as well is that the person who loses the ball has responsibility to go and press it, even if that takes them slightly out of position. So let's say, for example, that the red team are in a relatively low block here, and Kyle Walker, I'm not singling Kyle Walker out for any reason, is the player in possession, gives a fairly sloppy pass to the opposition here. Walker then has the job of immediately pressing up to try and recover that pass. That does leave England with spaces, and we'll come to look at the defensive issues that some of these facets of England's style present to them. But what it does mean is that if England can recover the ball aggressively, they will quite often have a number of players near, and that allows them to transition quite effectively back into attack. This is called counter-pressing. The best thing about this is because when, say it's this guy in possession here and he's got the ball, if you sort of bound him in like this and squeeze him over and win the ball back, you've also got a lot of colleagues nearby, and it makes that much easier to retain possession in the first instance. That could involve recycling it back to Rice, spreading it over, and then England having their opportunity to attack again. If the first line of the press is bypassed, obviously England are going to fall back. They will kind of make their block shape a little bit based on what the opposition are doing. So sometimes, you know, if the opposition are quite good and have the ability to play out from the back, you'll get something that looks more like a 4-5-1. Sometimes it'll be a little bit more aggressive. You might have a 4-4-2 with Sterling because of his pace, looking to maintain some sort of press here. Sometimes one of the midfielders will push up and try and assist in that press. Because England's 4-3-3 is quite flexible, what it means is that they can morph into a variety of shapes that allow them to press different parts of the pitch quite effectively. And then obviously a kind of a low block here will be what you'd expect. Rice at that point will quite often drop back and act as more of a shield. And so it will look more, I suppose, like a 4-1-4-1. Kane will tend to kind of loiter in this space. Although Kane is obviously a technically excellent footballer, he's also very good at taking the ball in the air. He's very good at winning fouls. And so he's a useful outball here. So it makes sense for him to not get massively involved once England are in a low, even a medium block, because they need that outball. It is also worth pointing out, though, that when the opposition have a free kick or a corner, Harry Kane is an extremely useful person to have in your own box as well as a defender. So he does weigh in with defensive work. So where are England vulnerable in defence? Well, there's a couple of things that they need to be aware of. One of the things that England can do is they can bunch really, really narrowly. So let's assume that the opposition, let's call him a left wing back and make them into a 3. He's got the ball here, so the rest of the opposition is sort of fairly well spaced out like this. England like to compact the pitch. Now that makes a lot of sense, as we've said, because of pressing, because of counter-pressing. Sometimes though, that compactness can be really quite exaggerated. And England, width-wise, will leave maybe one player out on the opposite side to the ball, possibly not even that. Possibly he'll be there and he'll be there like this. Now, from a defensive position, this does make sense, because what you're doing is you're hemming the ball in, you're denying this opponent opportunities to pass the ball. He's got more people to try and get it through. And even if he does make a pass to one of these free men, there's quite a lot of England players nearby. However, if he is able to, or say something, I don't know, like Sancho closes in, he looks to clear the ball long and there's a sort of a deflection or a ricochet or something, England can be exposed if the ball does come out to this side. Poland were able to do this a few times in the recent fixture that England played against them, where all of a sudden the ball ends up with this player sort of fairly central here. And because England are so narrow, then there are passes on here, and then Poland can start looking to attack like this. Austria could well use wing backs, so it's going to be quite a good test for England in terms of defending wide areas, getting the balance right between defending narrowly enough to compact the space and not so narrowly that they leave massive gaps. Because everything in football is a balance, right? You have to make a decision between what's good from a defensive perspective in terms of your pressing versus in terms of pitch control. But that is something that England have been caught out with before. Another thing that England have been caught out with before is the ability of the opposition to transition quickly against them. So this was seen particularly, I think, against Belgium. But teams that aggressively win the ball back and then have good players in central midfield that can transition it vertically, who can get the ball quickly up the pitch, can pose problems for England. And the reason for this is because of the way that England attack. Now, England are quite an aggressive side once they get into this part of the pitch, as we've seen. And they will create a circumstance where they might have as many as, let's say, if Shaw's got the ball here, they could have 5 or 6 players ahead of or level with the ball. Declan Rice is likely to be patrolling this area. And even if we make the assumption that the red team are playing fairly conservatively, England like to maintain a high line, but they can't go much higher than here, because obviously then there's going to be no offside if they're in the opposition half. So there's a bit of a tightrope. Now, England will get these players forwards because they like to try and generate lots of shooting opportunities and capitalise on the ability of their quick technical players to get in behind, and that requires bodies forwards. Otherwise, you can't play those quick interchanges of passes. What it does mean, though, is if this cross comes in and it's not very good, or if it comes through to the goalkeeper and the goalkeeper's able to clear the ball forwards, it can be easy for teams to isolate Declan Rice. And once you isolate Declan Rice, who is an assiduous defender and a good player, I'm not criticising him at all, but once he gets drawn towards the ball, all of a sudden the opposition have got players that are able to make runs in behind against England's 2 centre-backs. And a number of teams have done this effectively, and it is something that England need to be really wary of. Because Rice is quite often left as the sole kind of midfielder here in this area, he's got an awful lot of ground to cover. And even if Maguire steps up and Stones drops back, it's still quite easy for the opposition to burst forwards. Now again, this is a direct corollary to the way that England attack. The way that England's attack, particularly on the left, requires them to have a lot of bodies forwards, and so it's natural that they'd have fewer bodies back. But teams like Belgium, who are really effective in transition and have midfielders that are able to play through the lines and do it quickly, particularly towards wide runners, will cause England problems. One last thing to say about England is that they are capable of making mistakes. not highlighting anyone in particular, but John Stones does have a tendency to maybe take a heavy touch, misplace a pass. Declan Rice can be quite pressable. At West Ham, he has the kind of backup of Souček alongside him, sometimes a back three behind him, which allows him to take more risks. But again, if England are playing with this sort of system and they've only got these two players back, sometimes Rice will look to make a pass here to Stones, who's pushing forward, but it'll be intercepted. And teams that have pressed England aggressively and high do get joy from targeting these players. Again, that's not to say they're bad players, but it's a vulnerability that can be exploited. So England's defensive system, it's quite straightforward. There's a high press, or a press that goes on high, mid block and low block that adapts depending on the opposition and where they're looking to attack. But England's defence has flaws to it, and these are largely a result of the way that they attack, leaving spaces in various bits of the pitch that the opposition can exploit if they're able to think and act quickly. As we said at the beginning of the video, there is a possibility that England will play three at the back. They're most likely to do this in games against tougher opponents because of the greater degree of solidity that it affords them at the back. The lineup would likely be something like this. I don't think you'll get massive changes in terms of personnel. Kyle Walker as a right-sided centre-back obviously gives you quite a lot of pace here and means that your outer centre-backs are both capable of carrying the ball forwards, getting this kind of three shape here with the fullbacks or wing-backs pushing up high. There's only a few things to note about this really that are worth pointing out, because a lot of the things that England would look to do are going to be similar with a three at the back and a four at the back. It's more a question of who you have in various positions. So to create a three shape at the back when England are playing with a four, it requires a defensive midfielder to drop back. Obviously they don't need that if they've got the three, but these guys can split quite wide. You still get the sort of attacking triangles that you get on the left-hand side. It does ask a lot of Mason Mount. If he's in a two-man pivot here with Declan Rice, he's going to be expected to get forward into these dangerous positions, but at the same time, he's going to have a greater degree of defensive responsibility. That can slightly be mitigated by Maguire stepping up. And again, the kind of the safety, the comfort blanket of having a back three might allow England to play a slightly higher line and take some of the pressure off Mount, but he's still going to need to do a fair bit. You would expect Rice to be assisted with these players tucking inside, because again, otherwise, if Mount is up here, Declan Rice is once more going to be isolated. And I do think that's an area that England need to be quite cautious of. Although Rice is an excellent player and a dogged defender, he will possibly take on quite a lot of work. And if he's attracted to the ball too much and vacates the central position, England are going to be quite porous through the middle. But otherwise, the system will largely work the same kind of way. What it does is it allows Southgate to have players who can compensate with a stronger defence, who aren't necessarily going to leave a back two as isolated against teams that are really, really good transitionally. Bit of a comfort blanket there, like I said. It's also possibly, if Maguire doesn't recover in time from injury, which I think would be really, really harmful for England, and Carl Anker did a good piece on The Athletic about this. Let's assume that we have Tyrone Mings in here. Tyrone Mings is a decent player and has a good range of passing, but he doesn't have Maguire's ability to carry the ball forwards. And what that means is that England will start their attacks from further back on the pitch. They won't have the ability to carry the ball forwards. Now, if that happens and Maguire is out, then the back three might make more sense, because then you have a couple of players in Stones and Walker who might try and take on that ball carrying role a little bit more themselves, with the security of a third defender to try and make sure that if they get turned over, England still have a degree of security. So that's the back three. Like I said, there's no guarantee that Southgate will use it. He's been pretty consistent with the 4-3-3 since the summer games and the UEFA Nations League. It would be a little odd, perhaps, to change the system this late in the day, but I guess we'll have more of an indication. If a back three isn't used in either of the friendlies, then I would strongly suspect that that's going to be the way that they play through the tournament. It may be that Southgate takes the opportunity to experiment a little bit, and it is worth noting that in Kyle Walker and Reece James, he has two players who can play as right-sided centre-backs and right wing-backs and right full-backs. Reece James has obviously been doing this really well for Chelsea recently. And on the left-hand side, Luke Shaw has played as a left-sided centre-back for Manchester United. So there is versatility in this squad as well in the defensive positions, but you wouldn't want any of those players to play as a centre-back in a back four. So that's England. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, this is our new channel, Tifo IRL. There's going to be loads and loads of Euros content with this jazzy board and me or my colleague JJ, who is much more cheerful, explaining what is happening with tactics during the course of the tournament. So if you like this, please do subscribe to the channel, like the videos. It's Tifo, but in real life.
If you liked today's video, please subscribe to Tifo to help us reach 1 million subscribers. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. There are journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.